Gerard Proust. Gerard's an Arbor accredited bush regenerator for many years. He's been a bush regeneration contractor through Proust Land Services for decades. He manages a medium-sized team and works mainly on the south coast of New South Wales in rainforest to the southern extent of the natural range of subtropical rainforest in New South Wales. So I'd like to invite Gerard to come up here and for his slide to be projected on the screen. Thanks, Alice.
Okay, good afternoon all. As Tien rightly said, I'll be talking on post-fire assisted regeneration at on the Yatte Yattah Nature Reserve on the south coast. I'd like to acknowledge that this reserve is part of the Murrumbidgee tribal groups country who are part of the Yuin peoples. So this is 15 months after the Black Summer fires and 11 months of pretty hard work. What you can see here is some of the thousands of the millions of predominantly tobacco bush, and hidden amongst those are a whole bunch of passionately mad bush regenerators working their way up the slope. You can see the degree of the fire that ripped through this small reserve. We've been working in a systematic manner since May last year to stem the loss of diversity from the overwhelming numbers and vigor of weeds that have germinated since the fires. And the fires, this photo was taken around about noon, New Year's Eve 2019. And well, jumped ahead, and you can see that Yatte Yattah was right in the path of one of the firestorms. This fire hurtled through the farmland and forest into this unprotected reserve. It is surprising that anything did survive this onslaught. The fire was vast, 6 weeks in the making, and has been described by various sources as devastating, destructive, shattering, express-paced, a whirlwind of fireballs, distressing, fauna obliterating, etc., etc. The rainforest was hard-pressed to survive such an event, and let's hope there isn't another one here and elsewhere for many a lifetime. That gives you an idea of the peak of the fire, that it had spread from virtually the Clyde River all the way up through Ulladulla, Milton, and into the Shellhaven and the Kangaroo Valley. The Yatte Yattah Nature Reserve has expanded from 19 hectares when I first started working there 25 years ago to its present 36 hectares. It occurs on red-brown loam derived from volcanic monzonite. This small remnant is just north of Milton, 6 kilometres from the sea and 10 to 45 metres in altitude, and is surrounded totally by farmland. The Kurrawa Creek flows through the reserve from the west, and there are 3 north-south gullies which offered some protection from the fires. And I'll just go back and forth. That was 2019, and that was January last year, and you get a bit of an idea of the extent that the fire ripped into the different forest communities. As Tien said, the nature reserve is the main southern occurrence of the suballiance of Dophra, Dendrocnide, Ficus tuna subtropical rainforest, and the southern limit of the suballiance of Ficus strepilus dendrocnide cassine dry rainforest. This small remnant also has forest red gums and a mixed eucalypt turpentine forest, which are both poorly represented in conservation reserves. The Yatte Yattah Reserve is one of 3 critical areas in southern New South Wales where there is a dramatic change in the floristic diversity of rainforest. There are 34 tree species in this subtropical rainforest, with some impressive small leaf figs and chernwoods. There's 19 plant species that reach their southern limit here. That's just one of the 10 or so giant stranglers that did survive the fire. So what did we do and what did we record after the fires that marked a critical turning point in the many landscapes across a broad swathe of the Australian forest systems? After the fires, there was a much needed rains that turned into floods, causing accumulating challenges. So in April last year, we undertook a rapid site assessment. The fires had opened up large sections of the reserve that were previously impenetrable due to areas of vine thickets. Of the forest communities, we recorded 5 hectares of subtropical rainforest along the creek lines and in the western gullies, 14 hectares of dry rainforest on the talus slopes and gullies, and 17 hectares of the red gum forest and the mixed eucalypt forest, which were mainly on the ridges and upper slopes and paddocks. That just gives you a fairly good idea of the sheer ferocity. I'd never been able to make it to this point before. It's dry rainforest leading down into the subtropical, and this fire certainly ripped through this particular section quite ferociously. The fire burnt 75% of the reserve to various degrees. Half of all the subtropical, over half actually, greater than 70% of the dry rainforest and nearly all of the eucalypt forests. There are many species, both native and weed, that responded dramatically to the fires. Some such as tobacco bush and acacia from seed, others such as lily-pilly and Madeira vine from reshooting. This is truly a remarkable biological oasis. I did hand out to one of the tables, I'm not too sure where it is, but there is a copy of the Bofeld-Robertson 1997 survey that's going around if anyone wants to have a look at any of the background detail, and they recorded about 219 native species and 43 weed species, which is pretty good for a then 19 hectare reserve. Since then, we've seen over 180 species germinate as a result of the fire, over 20 weed species, and of the millions that have germinated, and literally millions, 80% roughly has been tobacco bush. On this slide, you can see typhoniums and lots of solanum with lots of senna and acacia. Over here, we have our friends Madeira vine and cat's claw reshooting quite vigorously. Work commenced in May 2020 with funds that was made available through National Parks and Wildlife Service, and those first weeks that when we went into these forest communities, it was deathly silence. There wasn't a bird call or any animal sound that we heard. The only noise was various grunts and groans that bush regenerators make in their daily routines. From the site assessment, we identified the unburnt and core areas of the different forest communities and prioritised work using the days that have been allocated to us. And we were allocated 50 person days to start off with anyway. The priority was given to the subtropical rainforest, followed by dry rainforest, and then hopefully we would get into some of the red gum forest, as well as identifying the core work areas. The different weed species were recorded and then prioritised. This you can see is a virtual sea and a real sea of, again, tobacco. Comprehensive weeding started in the core areas and radiated upslope and downstream. With from the initial days, we recorded over 120 native species and over 25 weed species. Of these, tobacco bush, Solanum mauritianum, and Madeira vine and Reddera cordifolia were rated the high priority weeds. These were followed by our regular friends of inkweed, 2 species of senna, moth vine, 2 species of passion fruit, and surprisingly, we had to prioritise in some areas the annual fleabane. But by far the most prolific in numbers and growth was the tobacco bush. Fitting this rainforest restoration story into 20 minutes, even me speaking at my quickest, is tricky. So I'll try to let part of the tale tell this whole story. In May, as we were working through methodically, we established a 20 by 20 metre area to monitor the varying methods and regeneration as much as we could. Into this area of 20 by 20, we broke it into 400 square metre plots. The plot 1 was the control, which is now dominated by 3 metre tall tobacco. 2, we decided to wait 6 months and to see what happens with our weeding, amount of time it takes, and what changes happen over that time. So we went in December, and I have some shots of that. We weeded plot 2. Plot 3, we primary weeded in the start of the project in May, and we sprayed it as carefully as we could. And then plot 4, we broke up into manual and cut and paint. So what we're looking at here is the baseline of the plot. We have been methodically working our way up the slope. You can see the piles of tobacco bushes, and that was one of the many practical problems we had with so much material, where to put it that you're not putting it on top of all of the natives that have germinated. So we did spend a lot of time finding suitable areas to put all this particular material. So the primary weeding in May to September was predominantly 8 to 10, maybe 12 people slowly working their way upslope, manually removing all the weeds. As I said, over 80% were tobacco bush. As we did this, and from the count that we did in these plots, so every 50 square meters, we were getting 1,000 tobacco seedlings, roughly 10 to 30 centimeters tall, and it was taking us 30 minutes to do that 50 square meters. Larger plants of the tobacco that were near, especially near native seedlings, we had to cut and paint. In this first area underneath all of this tobacco and other weeds, there were 30 native species and over 650 native plants in every 50 square meters. And this is showing the comparison between primary and secondary between May and December, where in May there was 80% weed cover. By the time we got to the end of the year, we were down to less than 5%. So we had primary weeded this whole area, plus the plot 4, and you can see here what you're looking at is a lot of native species. So the results were quite pleasing, to say the least. This was the plot 2 that we left till December, and you can see that the 6 months of growth have certainly made a difference to the numbers and the height of the tobacco. So what's happened is the tobacco has reached 2-3 meters in height. It is half the numbers that were in the same size plot that we did 6 months earlier, but the number of native species that were underneath that, the tobacco had gone down by about 10% of what was in the original work plot. And instead of taking us 30 minutes, it was taking us up to 90 minutes to go through and cut and paint this size and then find locations to put this amount of material. Again, you can just see the sheer amount of material that we've had to cut. Okay, I'll go real quick now. Okay, this slide is looking at plot 3, we sprayed, and plot 2 was the manual and cut and paint. The difference between the spraying, it took us only 25 minutes with prep time, but the native cover underneath was 25% native cover and only 10 native species, whereas in the one next door we had 80% native plant cover and 33 native species. So spraying compared to the other methodology definitely made a big difference. This is just to show the one of the problems and the challenges during secondary weeding is we got thousands of tobacco that we're dealing with, but the dendrocnide, the giant stinging tree, was there in its thousands, and to physically work that was a challenge, and the amount of damage that it did to all of the crew was quite frightening at times. They kept coming back. So the other thing that we haven't even looked at is we knew there was Madeira vine there. We did prioritize it, and it didn't start raising its ugly head till the summer months, until we got more rains. And as you can see here, it is definitely doing a very surreal sort of landscape for us, and we're adding that to our secondary control program. Haven't even looked at the fauna significance of what's happened and what is occurring in this reserve. But after that complete silence, by the time the end of the year came around, we were recording 28 species of birds had returned to the reserve. So we were starting to get this very beginning of a return to the rainforest regeneration, both on a flora and a fauna scale. One of the main ones, there used to be up to 100,000, the grey-headed fruit bats in this reserve. We've had about 300 return because of their fruit and other resources has been decimated since the fires, but they were one of the main culprits for moving the fruit of the tobacco bush around at the same time. Retain and protect and enhance and regenerate. There was a couple of points out of this. We ended up where we have primary weed at 14 hectares. That just shows you the extent of the smoke and fire again. And that's just a whimsical, there is always hope sign. But 3 million tobacco bushes we've removed, 200,000 inkweed, 100,000 spear thistle, 500,000 other weeds, and 2 million native plants have germinated. And this is just the first of small steps in a project that's going to be going long after I have gone. So thank you.